In this video, we're going to be looking at speaker placement. Now, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of where to position speakers and how to angle them, etc. We are just going to look at a brief overview of things to consider, things to keep in mind when designing your home cinema system, and then we're going to look at a few examples of various surround sound layouts. So let's get into it. Balance and width. That's something to consider. What do I mean by that? First of all, looking at stereo image. You want to create essentially a wide stereo image between any two adjacent speakers. What does that mean? So that's crazy because you think, well, you don't want stereo between your front and rear channels or whatever, but you need to kind of virtually visualize how things might sound, or you can even plug it into an amp and test it out for yourself. But what's meant by that? So to create a wide stereo image, it basically means having a left and right speaker channel separated far enough so that any balance in power or audio output between the two can create almost the effect of something moving or positioning between those two speakers. If you've ever experienced like a immersive surround sound demo, for instance, you would know what this means. Having speakers correctly positioned at decent distances from one another, they can create the illusion of there being more speakers in between, because they, using balance, they can move an object between the two of them. So when you're placing your, say, left and right speakers, be it the front or the surrounds or whatever, you also need to take into consideration the distance from your front speakers to your rear speakers, for instance. Because if you have, say, your front left and right speakers only a meter or so away from your surround speakers, there's not going to be a wide stereo image between those two, and you're not going to be able to differentiate between something that's supposed to be coming from the sound, i.e. sound that's supposed to be coming from the sound, and sound that's supposed to be in the surround channels. Because they're coming from effectively the same area, you've got no way of distinguishing that. So stereo image is something to consider between not just front and surround speakers, but front to back as well. Speaker size and power. It's important to know that while you can mix different speaker sizes and power capabilities between different surround elements, you don't want to mix them on alike channels. So for instance, your front, left, center, right, for instance, is the most important three speakers in any surround system. That's where the majority of the action happens. So for example, one instance where I've seen where people with DIY systems get this a little bit wrong is they would have very large cabinet speakers, like bookshelf speakers, for their left and right channels, and then have a small wall mounted channel for the center channel, and then wonder why voice in films disappear, or something that's happening in the middle of the screen just doesn't have the same impact as anything happening off to the sides. So the reason for that is front, left, center, right, a lot of the action is there, so you want those three to be matched in capability, size, power, etc. Once you start moving to surrounds or surround backs, obviously there's less going on there. Whilst you can use larger speakers for the surround speakers, you don't have to, because a lot less audio is happening in the surround channels than there is on the front channels. So size and power, you can mix them, but just be wary of where the differences are. And then of course different cabinet types. So what I mean by this, essentially bookshelf speakers come in two different types. So you've got sealed and ported speakers. The same go for wall mounted speakers and even for in-ceiling speakers. So in-ceiling speakers, though you can get ported speakers, you can also get fully sealed ones, and you get open baffle speakers. An open baffle speaker for an in-ceiling speaker is probably the most common type. And the reason you don't really want to mix different cabinet types too much is because you will get a completely different sound signature from those speakers. So for instance, a small sealed cabinet speaker is going to give you a very tight bass response. It's not going to sound too boomy. It's going to be very precise. and then a larger cabinet speaker with a massive port on the back or the front or wherever it may be, it's going to give you a much better low-end response, and it's going to create something of a boomy response to, say, voice, if there's any talking dialogue in the film. Usually you'd see this if someone is using a ported speaker for the center speaker, and all the dialogue that comes through is really low and boomy, and it almost becomes a pain to listen to. So be wary of mixing different cabinet types, and try and keep them all vaguely alike. You don't want to, again, a bit like the mixing of size and power on your front, left, center, right. You don't want your left and right to be, say, sealed cabinets and your center speaker to be a ported cabinet, because it's going to sound just out of whack. So moving on to angling and positions. Surround sound systems, especially home cinema surround sound systems, should be designed around a listening position, a single listening position, or a small listening area that might extend to 2 or 3 additional seating positions. And the way that's done is essentially all the speakers face you. All the speakers face the listening position, and that way you get the maximum effect from surround sound. Obviously, it's good to be wary of obstacles, be it furniture or walls. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen here is when people use floor standing speakers for the surrounds or surround backs, but the speaker is essentially just blasting directly into the back or the side of the sofa, which absorbs or reflects most of the audio, and then you don't get the same effect from it. Similarly, if you have a room with an awkward layout or like a stepped ceiling or anything like that, be aware that obviously the audio can reflect or refract and create weird noises. One example of this I've seen where it completely threw out one of the surround channels was a overhead channel that was recessed into a trough part of the ceiling, but there was overlap from in front of the speaker, and it was causing the sound to essentially bounce to the other side of the room when it came to calibration time, and the whole calibration system thought that the speaker was actually in the center of the room. So weird things can happen when you've got weird shaped rooms, so be aware of that. But then obviously it's worth noting that some speakers can be very forgiving with their placement, as in some speakers have a really wide dispersion, so you can basically put them anywhere without having to point it at the listening position, and you still get a good experience. But then other speakers are very directional. They have narrow dispersion where you have to point them quite closely to the listening position. Obviously, if you use wide dispersion speakers, they are good for having a larger listening area. That's generally the kind of thing used in commercial cinemas to try and get the same audio experience throughout the entire room. But that does also result in a bit of a flat sound. You don't always get the best effect. So you want to design your system around a single listening position. So let's go ahead and look at some surround sound layout examples. So a 4-channel system is essentially the minimum requirement for surround sound, which is also the same layout as you would need for listening to SACD format, which is 4-channel audio. You would have a front left and right and a rear left and right, all pointed at a center listening position. In this video, obviously the arrows are not pointing directly at the listening position. They are purely for just illustration. They're not precisely measured or anything like that, so don't take what's here with a pinch of salt. This is just to demonstrate where speakers can be and where they should generally be pointing. So in these diagrams, the bar at the top is essentially your screen, and the artistic squiggle in the middle is the listening position or someone sitting on the sofa, but he has no body, so yeah, that's why it looks weird. Anyway, so a 4-channel system can be 4.0 or 4.1, the 0.1 being the addition of a subwoofer. If you use 4 full-range speakers, you don't need a subwoofer. Similarly, you can also use 2 full-range speakers in the front and 2 smaller cabinets in the back, and you won't need a subwoofer because full-range speakers do produce a lot of bass. At this point, it's worth saying that in some systems, if you have large front speakers, you don't always need a subwoofer, because large front speakers or full range front speakers are capable of producing enough bass to negate the need for a subwoofer. That said, not all full range speakers can hit as low as a decent subwoofer. So that's 4-channel surround. Next step up is essentially just the addition of the center channel, and that gives you your 5-channel or 5.1 surround sound setup. I haven't added subwoofers on any of these diagrams because that's a different topic altogether. For now, we're just concentrating on the main surround channels available. So there are obviously 2 different types of 5-channel surround. So in this instance, you've got your front, left, center, right, and then 2 surround backs, or you can have that as front, left, center, right, and 2 side surrounds or regular surrounds. So depending on your room as well, that would probably dictate where your speakers are going to be. There's no real advantage or difference between having surround backs or regular surrounds. It depends on your receiver, whether it's capable of processing one or the other, or both or none. The decision between these two, if you're only going to have a 5-channel surround system, it will largely come down to your room layout and what you're capable of installing in there. Then adding 2 more channels, so essentially this is a combination of the 2 5-channel surround systems. So you go front, left, center, right, surrounds and surround backs to give you 7 surround channels. And then going back to 5-channel, but this is essentially a 7-channel because this is Atmos. So you have your front, left, center, right, your surrounds, and then 2 overheads or height speakers. And then that can be expanded to be 4 height speakers, or you can have 6 or 8 or 9. The number goes up and up and up until you get to something like this, an Auro 3D setup, which in fact this is only an entry level. This is like the minimum requirement almost for an Auro system, where you have front, left, center, right. Then you got wide surrounds. Not wide surrounds, front wides and front heights. Your 4 height channels, as well as that speaker that's in the middle, just in front of the listening position, which in Auro is referred to the voice of God speaker. And then you've got surround heights, surrounds, surround back. Yeah, like I said, this is an entry level for Auro. I think Auro supports more than 30 channels in a full-fledged setup, where essentially every speaker channel or every surround channel comprises at least 2 audio channels, as in surrounds, surround heights, front heights, center height, etc. You get how quickly it can build up to having a lot of speakers in a fairly tight space, all pointing at you. That's the one thing to remember. So I hope that this overview was very useful for you. And if you haven't seen some of these surround sound layouts before, I'm sure they will start getting the cogs turning and hopefully help you make a decision on what it is you want to get from your own surround sound system in your home cinema.